Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. What's the craziest crime that happened near your place? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. A man and a woman a few blocks away killed two people and dissolved them in chemicals in their basement. The house had been demolished and nothing had been replaced. It still gives me the creeps when I drive by the toppled-in foundation. I will share mine. A corpse of a 19-year-old was found near our home in the river, stabbed multiple times around the neck. After further investigation, it was found that the culprit was a 12-year-old kid. I live in a very rural area. About 2 miles from where I sit, a man was watching Terminator 2 in the evening one night about 20 years ago. Without explanation, he got up, went and got a gun, and murdered 6 members of his immediate family. He then hopped in a car and started driving south. The police discovered 5 bodies. The local news was live and reporting when the reporter tripped over the 6th body that had been covered. She was live on camera. They discovered the killer in a homeless shelter seeking food 2 days later. They had been searching for him the whole time. Locals were going crazy with fear that he was still around. How did I find out about this? About sunrise the morning after the murders, I was hunting in the woods near my home, rifle in hand, walking up a creek bed. All of a sudden, a helicopter flies over and starts hovering. I stop and just watch, thinking, what the... A bunch of cop cars came flying up the nearby road, and they jump out at me and scream to drop the gun. They were all freaked out. I complied. Honestly, I think I'm lucky to be alive. Surprised, some local backwoods Barney Fife didn't panic and pull the trigger. Not far from where I grew up, an anti-abortion activist climbed a tree in a doctor's backyard and laid in wait for him. He shot the doctor to death through the kitchen window as he was making a sandwich for his son. When I was a child, a pissed-off man with a gun took out his frustration with the medical system at a bunch of medical offices. I think he may have been seen at some of these, or at least at the hospital that they were surrounded by. I believe only 2 people were killed and a few injured. He was arrested shortly after, and he told them what set him off, being denied a refill on pain medication. This was in the early 90s. Coming home late at night one night, I got stopped by the police as I turned onto my street. I was walking. This traffic officer got called out to block off a road due to an incident. I wasn't allowed to go to my house because a few doors over on my street, a gentleman had lost his marbles and took his wife hostage at gunpoint. The tactical police team were there in numbers, and they had the armored truck with the turret-mounted machine gun manned and pointed at the gentleman's house. I eventually talked to the traffic officer about letting me sneak around the back of my house so I could get home. No one was hurt, thankfully. The wife and husband split up after the incident had wrapped up. But there's been worse crimes committed in my neighborhood. There was just none that were that close to home. A man jumped out of an airplane with the intention of killing himself. He succeeded. The crime was related to leaving the plane without an operator. However, he landed in the yard about 5 houses away from mine. It was pretty crazy for a few days as the NTSB and FAA investigators were around and stuff. The San Bernardino mass shooting occurred on 12/2/2015, a mile from my apartment. One of my colleagues was casually driving to Costco during the thing, and I filled her in on Facebook Messenger about what was happening and to get back home stat. She was fine. Police fired about 600 plus rounds to kill the attackers. That was crazy. A guy murdered his Tinder date in an affluent, predominantly white neighborhood because she would not have sex with him. He cut up her body and distributed the body parts in garbage cans in the predominantly black neighborhood where I lived. Remains were found next door to my house. I saw the guy the night lurking in some bushes. The crazed look on his face still haunts me. Piece of shit was caught. In my old neighborhood, there was a big party. Some guy got into an argument, shot and killed 4 people. He then left the scene on foot, went down the block and killed 2 more people that he had beef with just while he was at it. Another guy had chickens inside the city limits, but the sextuple homicide really outshone that one. I mean, keeping illegal chickens, he should face the maximum penalty because that's a crime against humanity right there. But I guess a sextuple murder could top that a bit. It happened at my place of employment. After work one day, a female coworker never picked up her young child from the sitters. They found her stuffed in the trunk of her abandoned car with a gunshot wound. It turns out it was a male coworker. He was participating in finding razors for his orphaned kid and going to the vigils and stuff. Absolutely cold-blooded. A kid I went to school with got addicted to heroin and screwed over his dealer on money, and the dealer hired a bunch of gang members to shoot him up with heroin and then brought him to a farm where they threw him in a manure spreader and closed him in the tank where he drowned in the manure, and his body was found after the spreader got jammed on his arm. His lungs were completely filled with shit water, which is how they knew he drowned. The spreader also ripped his arm and left foot off his body. Last month, a prisoner was taken from one city to another for trial. At a highway toll station, 2 cars cornered the van. Heavy armed gunmen came out and shot 3 guards dead and severely injured 3 others. They broke their buddy out of the van and left. A guy in my old neighborhood stabbed his old friend on both his legs because he didn't say hi back to him. In his confession, he said, "I greeted him while he was passing by, and he didn't say anything. I confronted him and told him, 'Why don't you take my salute? Aren't we friends?' He then ran away from the scene, and the guy died due to heavy blood loss." When I was in primary school, I live in Australia. I'm not sure what it's called anywhere else, but I was 9. I lived in a small town outside of Perth. A local kid from my sister's school, 12 years old, had gone dirt biking up the hills with his friends. His friends went home, but the kid, Jay, never did. His friends reported that they had come across a couple camping in the hills, but that was it. They found his body after a week-long community volunteer search. The couple had set up a clothes-lined booby trap, so when he rode through it, he came off. They did it all because they wanted to steal his dirt bike. Oh, and they also tortured him for a few hours before he finally died too. Where I'm from, murders don't even happen that often, and we have strict gun laws. So something like this happening in a rural town was just awful. A guy getting divorced went and killed his wife and her divorce lawyer, then started running around town and shooting at random shit. It was right next to my school, so everyone was looking out the window. Then he escaped and barricaded himself in some decrepit, abandoned house and threatened to blow everyone up as he stored weapons and explosives in it. In the end, he blew himself up with a hand grenade after maybe 12 hours of this. They found RPGs, guns, ammunition, and all kinds of stuff at the house. So he planned the whole thing. It was crazy. My neighbor shot an intruder in his backyard. My neighbor is a cop with a giant POW MIA flag in front of his house. The intruder was intentionally breaking into the veteran's home. When the cop showed up, they gave him a hard time for not mortally wounding the guy. It wasn't a crazy crime, just the timing was insane. It was the summer after sophomore year of high school in the afternoon. I saw a classmate and her boyfriend, who I have seen passing, waiting for a city bus that was in front of our high school when driving to Target. 20 minutes later, as I was going back home and passing the school again, a bunch of cop cars were at the bus stop, and a wrecked truck was nearby. I didn't think anything about it until school started in the fall. They announced the girl was hit and killed by a drunk driver. It was chilling to hear about it after seeing her just before it happened as well. There is now an memorial in the area where it happened. Dude had a 30-year-old married sister who recently got pregnant. He decided she was no longer pure, so he dismembered her body, left one of her body parts at a neighbor's door, and left the rest of her body parts scattered all over his house. It just happened about 2 weeks ago. A couple of years ago, some idiot kept going out in the middle of the night and setting cars on fire. I think 6 in total were torched. This is a tiny village where nothing ever happens, so it was pretty galling to live through it. Everyone had to go to the expense of CCTV, doorbell cameras, etc. The worst of it was that the police kept arresting him, then letting him home again while waiting trial. People were so pissed off that they were openly discussing just taking matters into their own hands with him. The police ended up moving him to another village about 30 miles away from his own safety. So I worked in a daycare and lived in this town on the East Coast for over 10 years. I ended up moving away when the incident happened. About 10 minutes from my old house, a father was angry at his baby mom and ended up dismembering his 10-month-old daughter. The mom ended up finding her when she went into the apartment. The dad was on the run, but thankfully was found and arrested. It is a small town and was so quiet. I work in a new state now. Built sometimes wonder how I would have had handled seeing a baby I took care of in such a condition. Life is scary. Life is crazy. It was sort of close to home. My stepsister knew both people involved. I lived maybe 2 hours away from where the crime actually took place. Long story short, a woman had been pretending to be pregnant. Obviously, at some point a baby needs to come into the world. Her solution was to kill one of her pregnant friends and cut the baby out of her stomach. Things ended about as you would expect. I won't honor the name of the murderer here, but if you want to research, look up Regan Michelle Simmons Hancock. That is the name of one of the victims, the mother. When we moved into what is now my parents' current house, there was this 2-story house directly across the road. A woman and her daughter live there, and the daughter has a weird-ass boyfriend. About 6 months after we moved in across from them, the daughter broke up with her boyfriend, and he didn't take it well. One night, when only the daughter was home, her now ex turns up, and they have an argument in the front yard. The daughter leaves at some point, and her ex then proceeds to set the house on fire before leaving. This occurred late enough at night that I don't think anyone noticed the fire immediately. My family noticed what was going on, and when the woman arrived at her house ablaze and was screaming on the phone to her daughter. By this time, the house is a lost cause, with the entire second story fully on fire. The rest of the night was pretty uneventful, as the fire department arrived and kept it from spreading to the neighboring houses, and everyone nearby who was curious arrived on our front lawn to watch the fire. The following weeks, the area was crawling with detectives, and the daughter's ex would face justice once it was deemed arson. The plot was cleared. A nice big house was built, and a lovely old couple moved in. Ever since, the streets have been much quieter and friendly. Bicycle Bob had this homeless guy who would bike around town. He was like a minor local celebrity in that everyone at least knew of him. He was a friendly dude, always polite. So he would go around town and do odd jobs for cash. And one day, the story goes, he got finished doing some heavy yard work for a guy, and the guy didn't pay him. So Bob went over to the dude's shed, grabbed a felling axe, and chopped the guy to death like Jason effing Voorhees. Man in our town shot his dog twice in the head because it was bothering his wife and he wanted to make her happy, and told police he could kill the dog if he wanted to, as it was his dog. Claimed the dog was old and in poor health. It was proven the dog was perfectly healthy in an autopsy. Had 4 unlicensed weapons in the home. He got 2 years in prison. The pizza bomber incident happened up the street from where I used to work at. Couldn't figure out why the street was all blocked off and traffic was being rerouted. Found out what was going on when I called work to let them know I was going to be late. A few minutes later, the police closed down all the businesses on the street since they had no idea exactly what all they were doing. We were sitting watching TV one evening. It was dark out. heard a bunch of gunshots really close to our house out the open back patio door that were sitting by. Turns out someone called 911 reporting a man with a gun on the green belt behind our house. The police showed up, and there was a guy with a gun there. Saw the cops' video later. The cops were trying to get him to drop the gun. It didn't happen. The guy raised the gun and the two cops fired a bunch. The guy went down but survived. Apparently, the guy was the one who called 911. He was trying death by cop. He had what turned out to be a pellet gun. This all happened within 200 yards of where we were sitting. When I was in college, I left for the weekend and came back to find out that someone got shot in the head a block away from my apartment. Crime wasn't that unusual, but this happened on the busiest street in the city in broad daylight. It was gang-related, if I recall correctly. Also, a freshman went missing, and that was national news. She was eventually found, and her boyfriend was charged with his murder. It's a very old war crime, but the town I live in has hundreds, if not thousands, of Allied World War II aerial bomb duds buried underneath roads and houses and schools and basically everywhere. If you tell people here that a 1,000-ton bomb was found, literally nobody will care. They might check if they are in the evacuation range and grumble a bit if they are. And then everyone forgets until the next bomb pops up somewhere a couple of weeks later. It's just part of life. Fun fact, the buried bombs are all reaching critical degradation and could basically all go off at any time, potentially causing a chain reaction. And there's absolutely nothing that can be done about it. Nobody knows where the bombs are, or even how many are still left, so people just pretend like everything is fine. Oh, we've also got a couple of 1,000 tons of live ammunition rotting somewhere near the coast, happily leaking lead and sulfur and white phosphorus into the sea. Apparently, dumping everything into the ocean seemed like a good idea to the Allies in 1945. I can't exactly blame them, but it sucks. Guy worked as a floor manager for a restaurant owner, got into a dispute about money, and the owner embarrassed him in front of staff and caught him drinking and stealing booze. Floor manager proceeds to break into owner's house, kills him, wife, his mother, and 3 children, including infant, used the knife, set the whole place on fire, and ran off. His name was Damian Karlik.